agenda, we do have him here today, Michael Miller. Just a quick background note for anybody who says, Michael, who's Michael Miller? I would like to know. I just want to share with you guys that not only is he an attorney and a partner at Fisher Phillips, which is Fisher Phillips is one of the nation's leading labor and employment law firms, by the way. But he has spent many decades working to play a huge role in shaping the professional employer organization industry. And you're going to hear us call that PEO over time for short. He helped draft some of the key legislation that brought legitimacy and regulatory structure to that industry. And that now supports thousands of small businesses across the country. On top of that, Michael Miller also is passionate advocate for child's cancer research through his leadership at CureSearch, which is an organization dedicated to accelerating life-saving treatments for childhood cancer. We are beyond lucky to have Michael Miller here to kick things off for our second expert segment for a discussion and a slight interview. Michael, we got you on X. We made it happen, my friend. Welcome. I'd love to give you the mic to go ahead and just share a little bit with innovators about who you are. I know I did a bit of a background, and just tell us about who you are, and then let's dig into some good questions, which I'll fire off.
Well, thank you, Josh. Again, I am an attorney. I've been practicing, hard to believe, 54 years, labor and employment law. I too, at one time, way back when, was a young, struggling attorney trying to think outside the box, trying to become an innovator, trying to find a niche market for me, something that I could do that might be a little bit different. If you remember way back when there was such a thing called postcards and U.S. postage and mail, back in 1983, I decided that the healthcare industry really was going to be an up and coming area. And I was a young, starving attorney. I said, well, maybe I'll reach out to the nursing homes in Florida and send them postcards saying, I am putting out a newsletter every month on labor and employment law. Would you like something for free? And everyone likes something for free. So I had maybe 30 or 40 nursing homes say yes. Little did I know, a year later, they would be looking for someone to represent them in the labor and employment market. And lo and behold, they chose this tiny little law firm, Counsel and Miller, Mike Miller, as their labor and employment attorney. And that lasted 40 years, 41 years actually, until I gave that up last April and went into semi-retirement. And then a year later, I was sitting in my office and one little employee leasing company, now known as PEOs, came to me and said, we're having trouble being recognized as an employer. Is there anything you can do to help us? And I said, well, first of all, you have to explain to me exactly what you do. Once I understood what they did, I said, is there anyone else that does what you do? And they said, well, a few other little companies do what we do. And I said, well, let's form an association. And I'll go to Tallahassee and I will make some pitches, recognizing that we're the size of a flea. You can't take giant bites when you're a flea. You can take tiny little bites. But let me go to Tallahassee and let's see what type of legislation we can come up with. And here we are now, 40 years later. I became the general counsel of the Florida industry. The industry as a whole in the United States is probably doing about $250 billion in payroll. Florida probably does maybe 15, 20% of that because we got the earliest start in passing legislation. And it's just hard to believe that through kind of hard work, perseverance, never say die, both the industry and I have reached this point where no one saw this coming, that we could become an industry where companies are being sold not for millions, but for billions of dollars. I'm just amazed and quite proud of what we've been able to accomplish with Florida as the leading state in the union with regard to PEOs.
Michael, I have a quick question. or just something that we can go ahead and lay out. There are people in the room who are going, PEOs, what are Michael and Josh talking about? Let's break that down for them. What is a PEO, and why is it, so impactful and important that this type of legislation was pioneered? And what did that do for small businesses exactly?
That is exactly what the first legislators asked me back in 1986. What exactly is an employee leasing company? What's a PEO? Back then we were called employee leasing companies, and the industry changed its name to professional employer organizations. But basically what the industry does, and it was an incredible idea, which obviously I didn't come up with, other innovators did. They take a small business's employees and place them onto the payroll of a larger company. Many of you have heard of ADP or Paychex. They place them onto the payroll of a larger company. And because the larger company has 500,000, 600,000, 800,000 or more employees, the smaller company of 5 to 10 employees, and now we're even talking about not just mid-sized, but large companies using a PEO, they get the benefits that are provided to a company that has 800,000 employees. They get the health insurance, the life insurance, the 401k plans. They get the workers' compensation, payroll processing, the human resource services. I mean, they allow small businesses to concentrate on what they know best, i.e. being a small business entrepreneur, and turning all the administrative headaches and hard work over to a PEO to handle. And it has been a win-win-win situation. As I explained to the first legislators in 1986, there's no losers. The employees win, they get better benefits. The PEO client wins because they're getting all these incredible services that they never could get on their own, being a 5, 10, 15, 20, 50 person company. And the PEO, of course, wins in terms of being able to supply these services and provide additional corporate income to the state of Florida and to other states by way of the services that they're able to provide. So it's been an amazing win-win-win, and I can even say win for the state, having this thriving PEO industry.
Michael, thank you so much for laying that out for folks in the room. I mean, a lot of innovators in startups in the room right now. Katie is on the stage. She studied law. She is very smart. She's a great founder. She has a hand up, and I'd love to go over her way to be able to ask a quick question. Katie, anything that you want to ask Michael while we have him here before we keep
Thank
going?
you. Thank you so much. And thank you for being so kind. Mr. Miller, I wanted to ask, well, first and foremost, thank you for all that you have done and continue to do in relation to, the employment sector, etc. I wanted to ask your thoughts, feelings, opinions on how we can now push forward to protect self-employed or those that are entering into a contract for service under the same laws and legislations or and so on and so forth that employees have. They have their employee rights, etc., like that. But as a startup founder, and especially entering into different contracts for service with others whilst one is building, in the UK, I don't know so much about the US, but in the UK, it's very difficult to be protected by employment law because one isn't essentially constituted as an employee. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on this and perhaps how we can work moving forward to ensure that everybody has those same rights.
Well, legislation is critical, Katie. I mean, words have meaning. One of my favorite phrases is words have meaning. Even punctuation has meaning. Believe it or not, I've litigated the difference between and comma and. I've litigated a parentheses for 8 years. So it's crucial that legislation be drafted and the proper phraseology be used and that there be basically an understanding that not just employees have rights, but employers have rights. And there needs to be a balancing of positions. I mean, anytime you go too far one way or the other, it's a huge mistake. And every time I've tried to draft legislation, and I've been able to draft quite a bit of it, it's certainly in the state of Florida, I always try to make sure that I don't go too far one way or the other. I try to be fair to both management. Try to be fair to labor. I try to be fair to employees. And that has worked tremendously well with my legislative efforts.
Katie, I see you have a hand up, and I know you had asked that initial question, so I'll go ahead and let you get a reply. And then we'll go back to Michael here in a minute after your reply and talk more about getting to Tallahassee and representing this association and some of the nuances of that. But Katie, please grab that mic, and what thoughts do you have for Michael?
Oh, Michael, thank you so much for answering that. And I agree 100% with what you're saying. And it is about being fair, just, and reasonable, and striking that balance so that there is no potentiality for abuse of position of power or so on and so forth. So I really take my hat off to you and applaud all of the work that you continue to do for employee rights. I really do hope that also we're able to extend that to those that are self-employed or perhaps entering into a contract for service, because they're, essentially, individuals such as ourselves that are just starting out and so on and so forth. I also believe that there is room for further protection for all within that scope. But thank you, Michael, so much.
One thing I would add to that then, though, Katie, again, along the lines of words have meaning, when you have self-employed individuals that might sign independent contractor type agreements, you have to make sure that whoever is drafting those types of agreements understand that words have meaning. And you cannot play loosey-goosey with terms that you put into agreements. You have to make sure that you are putting in there exactly what you mean to say. I've had situations where I've argued with state regulatory agencies, in fact, just recently, where they said, well, maybe our legislation doesn't say exactly that, but we know what we meant. Well, knowing what you meant isn't good enough. Words have meaning. If you pass legislation that says X, you can't say we meant Y. And it's the same thing when you're drafting a contract for an independent contractor. If you mean to say Y, then you don't say X, and vice versa.
Amen. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you. I'm now following you, and I'm excited to learn more about your journey.
Katie, I love having you on the I.T.T stage. And Michael, just to continue, on kind of that note that you had left us on, talking to us about what even is a PEO, and that, look, some people came to you and you formed an association and you went to Tallahassee, and now you're trying to work with policy makers or regulators and essentially get this thing over the line. What was the biggest challenge in getting policymakers to understand and accept what you just laid out for us? Or was it all cake? Was it all just a cakewalk? No problems at all?
Well, I often tell folks that what I found in the beginning of the industry, when the first little PEO came to me, was it was akin to Genesis in the description of the earth, which was, in the beginning, the PEO industry was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the industry. I mean, we had no shape, we had no form, we had lots of ideas, and we needed to try to coalesce those ideas into legislation. But as I said earlier, we were a flea. There was so much that we needed to do, but we couldn't go after everything at once. So the first thing I felt we needed to do was create legislation that said we were an employer for purposes of unemployment compensation. And that was a significant plus if we could get that done. I went up to Tallahassee. I met with the Department of Revenue. they were very reluctant to accept that position. We went back and forth. It got a wee bit contentious at first, but over a period of months, it actually turned into a friendship. In fact, it's turned into a lifelong friendship with at least one of the people that I used to deal with back in the mid 1980s. And I drafted legislation that basically said, despite the fact that the client might otherwise be viewed as an employing unit or an employer, the employee leasing company or the PEO will be considered the employer for unemployment compensation purposes. I drafted the legislation. It goes into bill drafting. Bill drafting modifies it somewhat. You go back to bill drafting and say, no, that's not quite what I meant. But ultimately, you get a piece of legislation, and you have to have your House and Senate sponsors, and the bill starts moving through committees. Again, we were a flea, but we had incredible good fortune. I had drafted this unemployment bill. It was moving through the House and the Senate, albeit very slowly. I certainly can't say I had a degree of certainty that it would have passed, but at least it was drafted and it was moving through the legislature. One day I get a call from a lobbyist representing U.S. Sugar, Publix, and Disney saying it's too late in the session for a House bill to be filed, but you have a bill that's pending in the legislature on unemployment. And we'd like to attach various amendments to it and use your bill as the engine that pulls all the bills into law. Are you willing to let us attach our amendments to your bill? And of course, again, we're a flea. And there's U.S. Sugar, Disney, and Publix asking us if they can attach their language to our bill. It took about 1 second to say, of course you can. And lo and behold, I certainly can't say our engine pulled the bill into law, but certainly they pushed our bill into law. And now we had the first piece of legislation in the country recognizing an employee leasing company, a PEO, as an employer. And that was a huge, huge first step in getting the industry going.
Michael, how did you know that that was the first step? I'm curious because you had to coalesce the sort of ideas from a bunch of businesses that are trying to do this type of thing, right? And bring that into a concise and meaningful legislation that you said words matter here. How did you get to the idea that that's what you needed to do first? Was it obvious, or did it take some research and figuring out and talking with the people you were representing?
Well, a lot of it was talking with the people I was representing. They felt that if they could become an employer through unemployment, that would be a major, major first step. I mean, we had other concerns and bills that we passed in subsequent years for workers' compensation, for regulation of the industry, for tort reform. We couldn't do it all in one bite. We were too small an entity. So we took this first step, and lo and behold, it worked. And that enabled us to get prepared for the next step, the next year, which was workers' compensation.
Michael, it's so interesting. So this just happened one step at a time with a little strike of luck along the way, right? And you being in the right place at sort of the right time, but then having to use your skills to, when those stars aligned, make something happen. About how many, actually, before I go there, what was the ramification of that first step, getting in legislation? What exactly did that allow them to do, these companies?
Yeah, I mean, it opened the door and for us to be an employer. But I mean, you're talking about skill, luck. I'll add perseverance. I mean, we were at the legislature. We were there late into the evening. I had drafted leaflets explaining what the PEO industry was, what we do, what we hope to accomplish. And one of my favorite stories is we went up to a particular person coming out of a senator's office. I handed him the piece of the brochure explaining who we are, what we're doing, made my big pitch to him, and we walked away. And my colleague who was with me as we were walking away said, Mike, I don't think he was a senator. He had a hammer and a pair of pliers in his pocket. But we persevered. We talked to everyone. And lo and behold, we suddenly were an employer for unemployment purposes, which enabled us to get to the next step, which was workers' compensation. What was happening was, if we are providing workers' compensation and an employee gets injured, there were situations where plaintiffs' attorneys were saying, so if the PEO holds the workers' comp policy and is the employer, then we can sue the client for negligence. So I drafted a bill that basically said there's workers' compensation exclusivity of remedy. If an employee is injured, they don't get 2 bites at the apple. They get to collect workers' compensation, but they can't turn around and also sue at the same time. That's the whole purpose of workers' compensation, to basically make it clear the path for an injured employee to collect compensation. But it was never meant that there should be 2 bites at the apple and that there would be another target, i.e. the PEO's client. So we drafted the workers' comp exclusivity of remedy, and lo and behold, step number 2 occurred, and we got that through the legislature.
Michael, what an incredible thing to be spearheading, like at the forefront of this legislation that's really representing now what's a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? So, I mean, for you, looking at a formless flea in legislation and now the industry where it is, did you ever expect it to grow where it has? And where are we now, right? So we have workers' comp, and they were recognized as an employer. How many steps did it take to get to somewhere where you guys weren't a flea anymore, but maybe you were a dog with a flea on it?
Well, there are steps and there are missteps, because a couple of years later, the governor at that time felt that there wasn't enough sales tax revenue coming in, and he decided to impose a sales tax on services. And of course, PEOs are a service industry. So we went to the legislature, and once again, I decided we were a little bit more than a flea, but we came up with a brochure that basically quoted from an 1800 Supreme Court decision that says the power to tax involves the power to destroy. We want to pay our fair share, but don't tax our entire payroll. Don't tax the wages, the benefits, everything that just passed through the PEO's coffers. Just tax our admin fee. And we had an agreement with the legislature that that's exactly what would happen. Lo and behold, the day the bill was going to pass into law, the Senate sponsor of the bill comes to me and says, somebody showed me a video last night about big banks, and I decided I don't like big employers either. So I've decided to kill your industry. And I said, Senator, we had a deal. And he said, well, things happen in politics. Tell you what, you have 1 minute to convince me. So I talked for a minute, and he said, you didn't convince me. I'm killing your industry. And they passed the legislation taxing our entire bill. Lo and behold, I'm sitting and talking with a particular senator, and another senator comes up and says, Senator, did you see what they just did to these people? And she said, yeah, but I promised the governor I would support the bill. He said, okay. And he went tearing down the hallway, came back in about 20 minutes and said, they're going into special session to vote you back into the legislation. And I said, Senator, how did you do that? He said, well, I went in and I told so-and-so that, I know where the bones are buried. And if you want this bill to pass, you put those people back into the bill. And they went back into special session. We went back into the bill as an exemption, and the industry was saved. And we've never faced a moment quite like that ever again, where we faced total annihilation over a taxing issue. So that started to make us look, well, maybe these guys have a little bit more power than a flea. Maybe their bite is a little bit stronger than a flea's bite. Maybe we're up to a tick at this point in time. And then we decided we wanted to be regulated. How many industries feel, yeah, we want to be regulated? Well, we felt that that would give us credibility, that there was actually a real industry being regulated by a real department in the state of Florida. So I drafted we still call it employee leasing in Florida, but an employee leasing licensing law that licenses PEOs under the Department of Business and Professional Regulation. We are now a real industry because that legislation passed the legislature. And now the growth is enormous because we are now recognized as a real industry for the first time. That's the first regulatory bill that had been passed for the industry. Now we probably have 30 or more other states that have pretty much followed Florida's lead, in part taking some of my language, in part taking some of their own language. But I'm pretty proud of the fact that a lot of my legislative efforts have withstood the test of time, and other states have chosen to say, hey, I like that language. Let's put it into our bill.
Michael, I mean, it is beyond interesting to hear about the navigating a world as complex and as nuanced as passing legislation. And now that, you guys have gone from, a flea to, I mean, this is a big industry. This is an alligator now. This is an enormous industry. What are the opportunities to move the legislation even further now, or do you think it's all done? Do you think that there are any big threats to this PEO industry that you sort of helped to spearhead?
Well, again, there's still more states. California has legislation pending right now. California's always accepted PEOs. It's one of the biggest states in the nation with regard to PEOs, but it's not had regulations. So we're hopeful that this year California will join the bulk of the other states to, in fact, have meaningful legislation that regulates the PEO industry, that basically gives it true credibility in the state of California. So again, there's always something that could be done. Congress could pass some legislation that could severely impact us, but we are again, when you're doing $240, $250 billion in payroll on a nationwide basis, when you're providing health insurance to so many countless numbers of employees and businesses, when you're providing 401k plans, when you're providing all these benefits, again, there's always risk, but we have become a real industry, a meaningful industry that's just so beneficial to the population in this country.
Michael, I went ahead and just as a note, I love where we're at here. We have about another 25 minutes or so, maybe 30 minutes here. When I end up asking you a question here, I'm just going to mute your mic on your end just so we don't have as much feedback. I had somebody in the audience send me a message and say, hey, Josh, we got a little bit of feedback when you're asking a question. So we'll try to juggle that mic on, mic off thing here for the next 25 minutes or so. I appreciate the note from the audience. I believe that was Sarah. Thank you very much for that. Michael, I want to be able to talk to you more about CureSearch here in a little bit. I was just completely inspired by what you're doing there. But before we rotate topics in any sort of way, you were at an instrumental time in industry. We're at instrumental times and pivotal times in industries right now. And I'm just kind of curious if you have notes for entrepreneurs or for business leaders listening to this event maybe what they can learn from what you went through during, kind of that entire process. And maybe if there's any salient points that you would give them as they move to new industries to write legislation, AI, crypto, there's sort of these new industries, little fleas that, people are starting to write legislation for and try to pioneer. I'd love for you to maybe talk a little bit to those folks in the room or who listen to the recording.
Yeah, Josh, certainly one of the key things is choose your champions wisely. As I mentioned with regard to the situation where the one particular senator wanted to kill our industry, there was another champion of the industry who had the ability and the wherewithal to save the industry. So again, you always want to make sure that you're choosing your champions wisely. You also want to make sure that, again, I'm sure if you are in a crypto industry or you're in another industry that you feel passionately about, persevere. Never say die. Again, if I had said, okay, I'll just accept what that senator said, I'm going to kill your industry, there wouldn't be certainly a PEO industry in Florida the way it is today, or perhaps in the entire nation. So again, persevere, never say die, write your legislation carefully, say what you mean and mean what you say. As I just said, putting the wrong punctuation can be devastating. Certainly choosing the wrong words can be devastating. Don't bite off more than you want. Just draft the legislation in a manner that benefits your particular industry, but don't overreach. Don't go too far. I was trying a case one time. I was questioning a witness, and the witness started to recant on what the witness had said. And the judge said to me, Mr. Miller, when you strike oil, you quit drilling. So again, try to strike oil, but quit drilling after you strike oil.
Michael, I love those notes, especially as sort of an ending couple pieces for this PEO bid. And I wanted to just, in the middle of our talk here, just say, I am so thankful for having you in the room right now and discussing your background and your process and what happened in those sort of early years of defining what is a incredibly large industry now. I mean, this is regular, this is mainstream at this point. And Michael being part of, sort of pioneering that early legislation rather is huge. But Michael, I think that is one of many incredible things that you've been doing. And I wanted to be able to move to another piece of your work that I love, that I have, as we've kind of become friends over the last couple of weeks, talking and chatting and setting this up. I've been inspired about your work with this and learn more about your personal story and background. And I mentioned at the sort of beginning when I was introing you that you have leadership and sit on a board seat at CureSearch, and you've dedicated a lot of time to that, like a lot of time. And I'm curious, how did you first get involved in CureSearch? Why is that cause close to your heart, right? A lawyer working on PEO is one thing because you're a lawyer, but working on CureSearch, there must be some reason that this is close to your heart. Can you tell us a little bit about CureSearch and how you got involved and why you care so much about it?
I can, Josh. I mean, CureSearch is just an incredible organization funding pediatric cancer research all over the world, basically concentrating on unmet needs, types of cancer that children get, types of brain cancer, DIPG cancer, sarcomas, terrible types of cancer that children get. And there are so many brilliant young scientists out there working on just the most miraculous types of potential cures for cancer. I got involved because my daughter at age 15 got diagnosed with ALL leukemia. I mean, her 3-year ordeal with cancer was just terrible. I mean, horrific, not just for her, but for us, for my wife and for me. I mean, she had 3 years of excruciating pain in her bones, fevers as high as 106.6, pneumonias, her hair falling out. How about a stroke? How about going into a coma, paralysis? This is not unusual for children with cancer. And when Amy had her stroke and she could no longer take this particular drug that we hope would be the life-saving drug, I reached out to a particular doctor at MD Anderson in Texas who has become a lifelong friend, and he was able to work out a regimen of drugs that bypassed the drug that caused the stroke. And he started talking to me about an organization that at that time he was the head of, called CureSearch for Children's Cancer. And I started working with them basically as a volunteer. And then after a period of years, they asked me if I would be willing to join the board of directors. And I served on the board of directors as long as I could, as long as the bylaws allowed it. But then they made me an emeritus member, and I now serve as an emeritus member. And my incredible law firm, Fisher and Phillips, has taken up the cause of pediatric cancer issues and CureSearch for children's cancer. And the really amazing and dynamic, and I honestly can say that, chairman of the board of Fisher and Phillips, John Polson, John is now going on the board of directors of CureSearch for Children's Cancer. So I'm so proud of this law firm. It's a law firm that I joined 6 years ago. I never thought that I would ever be joining a large law firm. I went to retire 6 years ago, and John said, no, you don't want to retire. Come over here for a couple of years. Well, I've enjoyed it so much that I've been there for 6 years, and I've loved every moment of working for this incredibly compassionate, skillful law firm that we only do labor and employment law, but it's labor and employment law with a heart. When you have people like John going on the board of directors of CureSearch, when we have the attorneys within the firm raising over $1 million for CureSearch just among our attorneys, that says a heck of a lot about this 700 attorney law firm.
Michael, thank you so much for sharing about how you got involved in why it's so close to your heart. And I can imagine that time with your daughter was like very hard on you and your wife, and I'm sure other family and friends around you guys. And I guess part of me just wants to ask, and I know you and I briefly had talked about this, but I would love to hear, I don't know, additional notes that you have. Michael, how the heck did you remain so resilient during that time? Like your daughter is not doing well, and you yourself having a couple issues you had mentioned as well. I mean, it takes a lot of resilience. It takes a lot of hanging in there, and not just hanging in there, but really creating a foundation that you can lean on. But for folks in the room who find themselves in places in life that can be really tough, what would be some notes, some things maybe that you learned that would be useful, or just maybe talk a little bit? How were you so dang resilient at that time?
Well, as I mentioned to you, I wound up having cancer at the same time as my daughter. About a year or so into her cancer, I got diagnosed with cancer. And it was so difficult on my wife to have her daughter with cancer, her husband with cancer. I was going to MD Anderson. My daughter was at All Children's in St. Petersburg. I was trying to work. I was trying to take care of my daughter. I would spend nights at Ronald McDonald House with my daughter. In my office, I would have a cot. I would have to take naps. The chemotherapy for me was pretty wearing. But my wife just was the person that kept us both going, where Amy, you need to keep putting one foot in front of the other. Michael, one foot in front of the other. Just keep going. And again, it really took a family. I mean, again, Hillary Clinton wrote a book saying it takes a village. Well, that was my village, my family. We relied upon each other. My son was there. My son went with me to Texas when I had to have work done in Texas. My brother went when I had to have surgery. My wife did her best to come to Texas when she could with me, but first and foremost was taking care of our daughter. And both of us understood that fact, that our daughter came first. But again, I had to prioritize, as Miles said, what was important. I had to work on the priority items because I was still practicing law, but I did have to find time to go onto that cot and take a nap. And everyone in my firm understood that I was not the same person that I had been prior to cancer. I needed some additional time to rest. But incredibly, it has worked out amazingly well for both Amy and for me.
Michael, and thank you again for sharing some of this. I know that some of this is really personal to you, and I think that there's folks in the room that resonate, that benefit from hearing you talk about this. And you said something to me on our call, Michael. You said, instead of asking the question, why me, you essentially turned it and said, why not me? Right. And when you said that, it really changed my perspective in some sense. Just you simply changing the perspective really changed my perspective on how we can be more resilient simply by, I don't know, reframing what's going on. And maybe you could speak a little bit to that quote that you had said to me on our call, that idea that why not me versus why me, and maybe how that helped to create stability or strength for you and your family.
Yeah, that quote actually came from the mother of another patient at All Children's Hospital. Her 8-month-old baby had cancer. And she said, I started this ordeal with, oh God, why me? Why me? And then she said, I looked around the hospital and I saw all these children in such pain, crying for their mothers, and the mothers were sole support of their family, and they had to work, and the nurses were incredible, taking care of these children. But I realized that I was so fortunate in that I could be there with my 8-month-old daughter. And I came to believe, oh God, why not me? Because I can be there. And that was so telling to me. That also became my philosophy. Oh God, why not me? I can do this. My wife never missed a moment. She spent every night my daughter was in the hospital, she slept in the chair next to her bed. She never missed a night where my daughter was in the hospital. And while I would be at Ronald McDonald House, my wife would be there. So again, we reached the conclusion of, why not me? We can do this. We can overcome if we pull together as a family. And yes, lo and behold, we were able to overcome.
Michael, thank you so much for sharing about that. And like, what an interesting perspective change. And I think there's a lot of people in this room, they find themselves in peculiar situations or very hard situations. And I hope that mantra and that note can stick with them, a little bit. So I really appreciate that. Further things on CureSearch. Just curious, Michael, what do you wish that? Let me just mute that mic real quick to reduce the feedback. And no problem, I got it there. What do you wish more people knew about, like, the challenges that CureSearch is leaning into? Or like, what is exciting about the progress that is being made from institutions like CureSearch? Like, is there some optimism or some things that we can you wish more people would see and lean into for childhood cancer treatments?
Josh, again, as I mentioned, we are funding research all over the literally all over the globe, because we're now funding in other countries. But again, in this country, we're at, I listed some of them: Cedars-Sinai, MD Anderson, Mass General, UCLA, Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, University of Florida. I mean, Washington University. I can go on and on and on. And as I mentioned, these are science fiction like it. At the University of Florida, what Dr. Sayer is doing, I thought nanoparticles was a term out of Star Trek. I didn't even know nanoparticles were real, but they grow nanoparticles in the lab. They take a piece of the tumor, they put it under an electron microscope into nanoparticles, inject it back into the patient's body, and basically try to trick the body's immune system into believing that this is a virus. And if the immune system believes it's a virus, the immune system, which normally won't attack cancer, attacks the virus, i.e., the little nanoparticle, but then recognizes the big tumor and attacks that. And from this project, I've been able to work with the University of Florida and the Florida legislature now to pass our initial bill with regard to an immunotherapy institute, an immunotherapy initiative at the University of Florida, where through the use of artificial intelligence and inputting tens of millions of case studies, we hope to be able to come up with cures for not just cancer, but any immunologically related disease, from diabetes to Parkinson's to Alzheimer's. This is a first step, and I'm so proud of the Florida legislature. I'm so proud of the University of Florida. I'm just so proud of Dr. Sayer, Dr. Mitchell. And again, we have the most powerful supercomputer in all of academia, thanks to NVIDIA. And I'm just so optimistic about the future. I'm so optimistic about these brilliant young scientists and what they're going to accomplish.
Michael, I'm excited as well. And it's so interesting to hear about the work that is going on. It sounds like something out of Star Trek. You're right. It certainly does. And doing just an incredible, having an incredible mission that you support in the way that you have, I'm sure has given you a lot of perspective and a lot of different things to see, right? From legal to nonprofit to entrepreneurial, endeavors of working with business owners and representing them over time. Michael, I want to be, mindful of the time that you're giving us here today. And I just have a couple more questions. I couldn't jam everything into the hour that we had here. And these are a little bit, these last two really aren't so connected to CureSearch or to your work in the PEO industry and defining that. This is more just at a high level as a builder, as an innovator, as somebody who has been taking ideas to impact and working within teams to do that over time. Michael, from your experience, what do you think sets true innovators apart? It doesn't matter if they're lawyers, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders. In your experience, working with people who get it done and those who don't, who just talk about it and run in circles and so on, what do you see as the difference? What's the core difference?
Well, again, there are many, many, many people that are a lot brighter than I am. But being bright isn't necessarily the true test of being an entrepreneur or an innovator. It's the ability to think outside the box, to look at the big picture and think, what are the needs? So many folks just can only go from A to B. They don't realize that sometimes you have to go to C and D before you can get to B. There's not just a straight line to the goal. You have to be willing to accept some hard knocks. You have to be willing to accept some variances. But again, as I said earlier, you have to persevere.
Michael, when was there a time when you had everything lined up to go a certain way, you thought it was going to go that way, and it doesn't, and you had to pivot, and you had to either pivot or push through beyond all the odds? Can you share a moment like that? Do you have any story in your long career where you had to pivot, you had to change course, and maybe it turned out better? And like at the time, you were thinking, "There's no way that this can go a different direction than we're taking it." Yet here you are. Is there any story that stands out to you where you needed to pivot?
I don't have any particular stories other than there have been many, many, many times in drafting legislation where there was particular language that I felt, boy, this would really be good language for the industry. This is really important. But I recognized that there would be pushback. There might be pushback. Again, there are other similar type industries that might react adversely. In fact, I one time had another industry that said, if you keep that language in the bill, we'll do our best to kill the bill. So I recognize that sometimes it's better. There used to be an old commercial, cigarettes, I'd rather fight than switch. Well, sometimes it's better to switch than fight. And you have to recognize, again, you're trying to get from point A to point B. Sometimes you can get there directly, but other times you need to go to point C and point D before you can get to B.
Michael, I love that insight and love those thoughts for a community innovators. Absolutely worthwhile. Rembrandt, I see you on stage. Rembrandt Fokker, welcome on into the I.T.T here. Any questions, comments for Michael Miller while we have him? And then, Michael, I have one more question for you on my end before we go ahead, and I want to be mindful of your time. Absolutely. Rembrandt, welcome to the I.T.T stage. I don't know if we've had you here before, but any questions, comments, or thoughts for Michael? Mike is all yours. And I cannot hear Rembrandt. If folks in the audience can give me a thumbs up or thumbs down if you're in the same boat as me on there. Rembrandt, what we'll do is we'll push you down from the speakers. We'll bring you back up, and we'll see if that works for things. In the meantime, Michael, also thanks for muting your mic. Man, you're coming into the 21st century as you had said, demanded. Josh, help me get into the 21st century. You're certainly coming into it with some pizzazz, Michael. I notice you're using the mute button and doing the whole nine. So cheers to you and very well done. Michael, who inspires you to keep raising the bar for you? Who inspires you? Who do you look up to? And I'd love to know.
My daughter. Again, went through 3 years of hell. And if that wasn't enough, 3 out of 4 children suffer long-term effects from cancer. And in my daughter's case, 19 years after the stroke, 19 years after the treatment, she was talking to me on the phone and driving home. All of a sudden, the phone went dead. And about 10 minutes later, somebody called me on that line and said, "Were you just talking to someone?" I said, "Yes, my daughter." And they said, "Well, she's just been in a head-on car crash. She developed epilepsy." 19 years after the treatment ended, the brain waves could no longer get through the dried up blood that unfortunately happened when she had her stroke. So now she lives with epilepsy, but she's overcome that. She was the marketing director of the Rays baseball team. She's moved on from that to Tampa General Hospital doing marketing. She inspires me on a daily basis. What Amy has been able to overcome and do is truly amazing.
Michael, this has been a phenomenal hour with you. And let me just tell you, you, sir, are inspiring. You are a career and, sort of decades of, I think, doing the right thing and working hard and being there for friends and family and creating resilience and a foundation that then you can come into this room and share with other people and really spread your impact even further. And that was my hunch when we met each other at the Silicon Valley Summit there for Plug and Play. When I mentioned, it was my hunch that your experience and your knowledge are meaningful to a lot of innovators who are trying to move the needle, who have setbacks, who certainly have setbacks, right? And have things that they're trying to work towards. So, Michael Miller, the fact that you got onto X, you didn't have an X profile before, you got onto X, and you said, you know what, I want to come on in and be a part of this and share some of my insight. To me, I just can't thank you enough for that, Michael. It has been so cool to have you in here. Is there any last thoughts or any last words that you want to share with a community full of innovators, people who are building on a regular basis? Anything that you want to share with them, Michael?
Yeah, the only thing I would say is find your passion and follow your passion. And again, when you're able to do something for humankind, for humanity, do it, because life is short. And again, I'm so proud of what I have done for the PEO industry, but I have to admit what I've done in the world of pediatric cancer, I think that kind of is head and shoulders above everything else I've done in my life. So find your passion and pursue it.
Michael Miller, this is from me and the entire Innovator Think Tank community, because we're in a forum where you couldn't hear everybody even if they were clapping. So sir, thank you so much for the time that you set aside and all the headache that you put into getting on this type of platform. It wasn't, it's so nice to have you on the digital age now, though, Michael. Maybe we'll see some more posts and tweets and stuff from you in the future, and maybe we can bring you in a session later on and continue to pass on wisdom and insights and processes and thoughts that could be helpful for young builders as they take on their ideas to impactful realities.
Thanks, Josh. It's kind of nice to move to the 21st century.
Well, it's great to have you. It's great to have you. One heck of an intro in here indeed. So, all right,